Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us this morning for Coffee with the Collection. My name is Amanda. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art. I'd like to start out by saying today is our 2-year anniversary of this program. A big thank you to our virtual team, Karen, Hadley, and Kaylee. None of this would have been possible without all of your hard work. And of course, to everyone in our virtual audience. Some of you have been with us since our very first episode. So thank you to you all for making Coffee with the Collection such a success. To get things started, first let's go out with a little housekeeping. Everyone should be on mute right now, and I'd like to ask you all to keep yourselves muted so we can hear our presenters without any distractions. But if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question during the presentation, please feel free to do so using the chat feature. To open your chat, scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the icon that looks like a speech bubble. It should say chat just underneath that. Once you do, a window will open to the side of your screen where you'll be able to type questions and comments, and we'll circle back around to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. We have also enabled closed captioning. To access that feature, click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So now I'd like to invite everyone to sit back, relax, grab your favorite cup of coffee. Hopefully you have with you this season's special roast, Avant-Garde, created by our friends at Yellow Dog Coffee Company, with flavors inspired by the subject of today's discussion. So without any further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. We have Karen Bowles, the museum's Community Learning Coordinator, who will talk about the life and work of artist Olinka Hrdy, followed by Tammy Greenman and Kelsey Carper, two founding members of the collaborative company, Factory Obscura, who will talk about the synesthesia experience on display in the museum and how Olinka Hrdy's work served as a jumping off point for their creation. Tammy Greenman is a co-founder and director of strategic creativity for Factory Obscura. She is an experiential artist focused on facilitating and collaborating with the artist team to create emotionally immersive experiences where all people are free to and encouraged to fully engage with their feelings as they explore and experience the team's work. Kelsey Carper is a co-founder and director of logistical creativity for Factory Obscura. Her creative practice is focused on projects that build community and create new opportunities for artists. Her practice is informed by her previous work with the Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition, and as co-founder of Current Studio, a temporary art space in Oklahoma City that experimented with new models for artist support. And last but not least, we have my esteemed colleague, partner in crime, and all-around fantastic human, Karen Bowles, also known as the museum's Community Learning Coordinator. Karen earned a bachelor's degree in English literature from Oklahoma Baptist University and a master's degree in art history from the University of Oklahoma. Karen's research interests include figuring out how many jelly bean flavors can be sorted in an hour, why are punctuation marks not fluffy, and just how many paper mache eyeballs does it take to cover the front lawn of the museum. I say all of this in jest. Karen actually does take her work quite seriously, and I have to say that from jelly beans to museum interpretation, it is a treat to have you and Kelsey and Tammy here with us this morning. So before I officially hand things over to Karen to get things started, I'd like to go ahead and ask our audience members a question that you can answer by typing into the chat window I mentioned earlier. So to get us in the right frame of mind, I'd like to invite you all to share in just a few words, what is the first thing that comes to mind when I say the phrase immersive art experience? What does that make you think of? Anyone who would like to, feel free to go ahead and type your thoughts into the chat window. While everyone is sharing with each other, Karen, I will now go ahead and officially hand things over to you.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. As Amanda said, I'm here to briefly introduce you to an artist who is probably not all that familiar unless you've come across her work here at the Fred, since the majority of her surviving art is part of our collection. Some local members of the audience might remember a wonderful retrospective exhibition of Hrdy's work here about 15 years ago now that was curated by our former director, Mark White, who did a huge amount of research into this fascinating and often overlooked artist. So a big thank you to Mark, since much of the information I'm going to share with you is from his wonderful catalog from that exhibition. Olinka Hrdy got her start as a student at the University of Oklahoma in the 1920s. And we wanted to give you just a glimpse into her innovative and unconventional life and work before Kelsey and Tammy share how she inspired the Factory Obscura team almost 100 years later. So let me click over here. Hrdy worked in a variety of styles throughout her career, shifting back and forth between realism and abstraction, often pushing the envelope of what was expected at the time. She once said, "I think an artist has to be very versatile in this day and age. You know, you have to be able to paint a flower exactly like it looks, or a butterfly with all the little hair on it, or something abstract." And here you can definitely see the two sides of that coin with her delicate, detailed drawing of a flower next to this completely abstract interpretation of light. We'll see some other examples of her experiments in style and subject in just a few minutes. But first, you might be wondering, Olinka who? So let's start with this unusual name. Olinka Hrdy, H-R-D-Y, which is pronounced Hrdy, and her family was of Czech descent. In Czech, Hrdy apparently means proud. Olinka was born east of Oklahoma City in the small town of Prague, and that is Prague here, not Prague, in 1902, just a few years before Oklahoma statehood. She actually grew up in a sod house and helped on the family farm as a kid. In high school, she did a lot of embroidery and planned to study domestic arts or home economics in college. It didn't take her long to change over to art once she got here, though. Hrdy traveled about 60 miles from Prague to Norman to attend the University of Oklahoma in 1923. The portrait of her that you see on the right was painted by an art instructor, Lawrence Williams, who happened to be from her hometown, in one of his portrait classes while she was a student. So you can see what she actually looked like during her time here at the university. For those of you familiar with Norman, this shot of campus from around that time probably doesn't look that different from what you'd see today. We're looking south from Boyd onto the North Oval. On the left, I think you'll be able to see my pointer, is what was then the library, but is now Jacobson Hall, OU's visitor center named for Oscar Jacobson, who was the head of the art school when Hrdy arrived here and was later the first director of our museum. On the right, over here, you can see Holmberg Hall, which at that time was the Fine Arts building where Olinka would have studied. And next to that, you can see this empty space where today you would see our current art school, which is connected down the block to our museum. Hrdy's family sent her to the university with only $50 to pay for a whole college education. So art faculty like Jacobson and instructor Edith Mayer helped her pay her own way by finding her mural commissions on campus and around Norman. One of her first official murals was in the Fine Arts building we just saw. She went on to do a series of murals for the campus dining hall, the Copper Kettle restaurant, which was on Campus Corner, and more. She even did an unauthorized mural of 3 nude figures in her dorm that apparently got her into a little trouble, but succeeded in scaring away potential roommates so that she ended up with a private room. Unfortunately, none of her murals from this time period survive. I think the one in the Fine Arts building was destroyed in a flood, and then other ones have just been taken down or didn't last. There are a few not great black and white reproductions that show us many of them were figurative and realistic. But to me, one of the most interesting things about these murals was how Olinka explained her spare use of color at that time, which you can see in these drawings, not murals, but drawings of Oklahoma's Turner Falls. Even though she was being paid for her mural work, that money went towards room and board and other school expenses. So she had to be really thrifty with her materials. Barring perhaps from needlepoint, Hrdy used really bold outlines, often black, with contour lines of bright colors right next to those outlines to give the effect of certain colors without filling in the whole area with solid color. This left a lot of negative white space to make a little paint go a long way on her small budget. This would change for her first project as a college graduate, thanks to an encounter with architect Bruce Goff, who saw her mural series in the campus dining hall and tracked her down to ask her to collaborate on an upcoming commission in Tulsa. So Goff had been hired to design a home and studio for music teacher Patty Adams Schreiner on Riverside Drive. And at his invitation, Hrdy moved to Tulsa to design a mural series that would complement the building. It must have been nice for an art major to have a paying job straight after graduation. And she got to use all the paint and colors she wanted for this project. You'll see the change in that. We'll see how she put all that extra paint to work. First, you're seeing here one of Goff's preliminary plans for the exterior of this studio. There was a fountain designed by Alfonso Iannelli, and then there's a large window and small black rectangular windows next to that at a diagonal that suggest maybe musical notes or a scale on a score. Goff and Iannelli even referred to architecture as frozen music, which was appropriate for a music studio. Here's a photo of what the completed white stucco studio and house look like in more recent years. And it's still there, and this is now home to Tulsa's Spotlight Theater. I also wanted to show you here the floor plan for the whole studio and house. Hrdy's part of the project included a mural for the entryway, and you can see this is where that fountain, the pool would have been, the front of the studio, and this entryway foyer. Hrdy's largest mural would have been at this area, and it would be behind that large circular window we saw in the center of the front of the building. The doors on either side of that mural would have led into the recital hall itself, where the rest of her murals would be. And you can see down at the bottom of the floor plan, kind of a reminder, those music notations, kind of a scale that were inspiring Goff and also Hrdy. So the mural that went in the entryway was called Symphony of the Arts, and we're looking here at the watercolor study that Hrdy did as part of the design process. The Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art is lucky to have all of the watercolor studies for her murals at Riverside in our permanent collection. Goff's architectural style was heavily influenced by Art Deco, and so Hrdy followed suit. She didn't completely let go of representation even at his urging, but she did experiment with more abstract designs than in her previous murals. With this panel, she expressed Goff's idea that architecture, music, visual art, and dance were all connected. If you can imagine, this was 16 feet tall, and the dancing figure in the center was actually inspired by Goff's wife, Evelyn. The kind of arch-like structure around her represents architecture itself. If you look really closely, you can see musical notations. Like I said, this was the largest painting Olinka did for the project. And like the others we'll see in just a second, its color palette apparently tied back into the building itself, which had really bright blue on some walls. There was a green marble fireplace, black tiles. So some of the colors she chose would have coordinated with Goff's design. So inside, once you went into those doors to the side of this mural, you're in the actual recital hall, and there were 8 other panels. These were narrower, they were 5 feet wide each and 16 feet tall, so very tall and narrow. The compositions direct the eye upward, and when they were installed, the top portion kind of made a 90-degree turn onto the ceiling. So they start wrapping onto the ceiling above people viewing them from below. Each panel was inspired by a different style of music. Some have more easily recognizable or representational elements than others. Some of them are fairly abstract, where they're using just geometric shapes and patterns and organic forms to represent the types of music. On this slide, we're seeing 4 of the music murals. From left to right, we have modern American music, and then vocal music, piano music, and string music. And then here we see what would have been on the opposite wall, orchestra music, primitive music, and choral music, as well as music of the future. When we show that last one to younger museum visitors these days, that's more like music of the past, since many of them don't know what a CD is, much less a vinyl record, which is probably what you're seeing in this design. Sadly, these watercolor studies are all that's left of the murals today, and that's a whole mysterious story for another time. But there are some black and white photographs that show what they would have looked like full size in the auditorium. You can see, as I mentioned, how the paintings extend up onto the ceiling. And one other fun tidbit here, although her design for all the murals and including modern American music, which you can see at the far left on this slide, those were all approved by Patty Schreiner, the studio owner, before they were painted. But Schreiner was not a fan of jazz and told Hrdy to leave that style out of it. They had some other artistic differences about color choices and things like that. So in the completed murals, as perhaps a way of having the final word, hidden in that grid-like pattern in the lower left, Olinka included the word jazz and her own initials. So you can see that in that little detail there. After this major project, Hrdy was really just getting started. She collaborated with Goff again on a refurbishment of Tulsa's Brady Theater before going to New York and then spending a brief time in Chicago, a very brief time at Frank Lloyd Wright School in Wisconsin, before she relocated to California more permanently. She continued making murals, easel paintings, drawings, but the bulk of her career was actually spent in industrial design, doing things like wastebaskets and radios, placemats, all sorts of things. But just a few examples here of her paintings after Riverside so that you can see some of what she got up to after that time. All of these are in the museum's collection. She did things like turning basic geometric shapes into visual games, playing with layers and perspective. She tried to capture the sense of sound in paint, often using architectural tools for precision. And she reimagined ordinary places and things as bold, abstract compositions. Here, for instance, is her take on Chicago's Lakeshore Drive during the 1933 World Exposition. So you can take a look at that and see if you can figure out what looks like Chicago in that very geometric design. But don't think that she gave up on realism altogether. That artistic versatility that she prized was still in play. Here is a 1939 mural that she created for Will Rogers Middle School in Long Beach, California, as part of the Federal Art Project. It's got some charming characters from Under the Sea that we'll revisit shortly in our discussion. But this is just showing you the range that she continued to have throughout her career. Actually, I think that's a good place to end my part of the conversation and hand this over to our friends from Factory Obscura, who are going to tell you how Hrdy's works inspired their current experience here at the museum. So click on and I'll let Kelsey and Tammy take it away.
Thank you, Karen. That was such a nice introduction to Olinka's work. And hopefully, if she's new to you, you all can see why we were so inspired by her as an artist and also her as a person. The more we got to know about her, the more we wish that she were around so that we could actually collaborate with her today. But, you know, we actually started this process with the museum a couple of years ago, talking about the idea of Factory Obscura creating an immersive experience in the gallery there that would be inspired by the museum's collection and help audiences come in and kind of maybe see the collection in a new way through this immersive experience. And so our team spent quite a bit of time in the museum looking at all of the amazing works. Of course, there's a lot to be inspired by in the museum. But we all found ourselves drawn to the work of Olinka Hrdy, and in particular, these studies for those Riverside murals, which were on display at the time we were visiting. And we found, I think at first glance, it probably doesn't seem obvious how our work is similar to hers, but we see a lot of similarities in that she provides a lot. Of course, she always has these amazing color palettes, which we were very drawn to. But she also has a lot of fine detail and kind of architectural quality. And then within it, as you get closer, there's so much texture and things to be discovered once you spend more time with it. And so those are all things that we kind of like to incorporate into our work as well, in a more three-dimensional space. And so we just felt a real kinship with her, and started to explore what it would be like to create a space inspired by her. And we can click to the next slide. And maybe Tammy can talk a little about our creative brainstorming process.
As Kelsey pointed out, we were very drawn to Olinka's work, and there's a vibrancy and an aliveness to it that was very intriguing, but there's also a mystery about it. Like, it became obsessive to us, like what happens between those layers, because she does so much layering. And we started to talk about what if those were memory pockets, and then we started to talk about what triggers memory. And we started to talk about, you know, when you smell something in particular, maybe it triggers a memory, or if you hear a certain sound or a piece of music, that triggers a memory. And so we took that and combined it with the color palette that we wanted to pull, which is in this bottom left-hand corner. And we assigned these colors their own little personalities. So they all had their type of clothing that they would wear and what their favorite food was. And we just really went deep on kind of the personal aspects of these colors and what sort of memories we would associate with them. And that's kind of the starting point for where we took the original work of Olinka's and we started to factory obscura it into synesthesia.
We can click to the next slide. And yeah, this shows, as we started to take all of those kind of abstract concepts that we were creating around these color personalities and memory pockets, we started to think, okay, how do we actually lay this out in a physical space? How do we organize this space? If you've been in the gallery, or even if you haven't, you know, it's kind of a long, narrow space. One wall is all windows, which was a new challenge for us, working with natural light. Normally, we like to control every bit of light in our spaces, but this was a fun new way to think about light for us. But anyway, as we were planning how to arrange the space, we were looking at this piece of Olinka's work, which is in that great catalog that the museum put together during her exhibition. This piece is called Sex. And the way that it is arranged, kind of the shapes of each of these groupings, inspired how we laid out the floor plan for the gallery. Obviously, the shape of it, the gallery is more rectangular, whereas the artwork is more square. But this drawing hopefully can show you kind of where we took the inspiration for how we even laid out the pieces within the space. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then it started to become more of a real physical space idea. And these notes that you're seeing here are some of those things that we brainstormed that Tammy talked about, some of the characteristics of the colors that we landed on. And then the SketchUp drawing in the middle was one of our early models of how just kind of the masses of the objects we were planning, how they would fit together within the space. Obviously, this isn't exactly what it looks like, but this helped us to plan how we were going to fit everything, because we like to pack a lot in. So this helped us plan that. And I think there may be another view of it on the next slide. Yes, looking down from above, so you can see kind of how it all laid out. Yeah, there's some more views, and you can see all those windows. And then some of these slides have some of our inspiration, some other artists' work that we were looking at, and other kind of materials and techniques that we took inspiration from. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these elements that we incorporated?
Yeah, so once again, we're going back to layering. We were very interested in that. And at first we had we were really drawn to the idea of using string or some sort of something that mimicked that, but we moved off of that. But we wanted to keep these, in the beginning, we wanted to keep these geometric shapes because we were kind of starting with Olinka's work. So we wanted to start with this really geometric entry piece. And these are some of the examples of the inspiration. So we knew we wanted to create it in layers, and we knew we wanted it to be geometric, and but also have start to lean into an organic shape. So that's kind of the swirling that you have at the bottom.
Yeah, that was something that we became really fascinated about with Olinka's work, that Karen gave a good example of at the beginning of the presentation, that she has this very architectural, clean line quality to all of her work, but there's also an organic feel to it. You can definitely feel the artist's hand in the work. And then she also takes a lot of her subject matter comes from nature. And so we started within our team, we started referring to that as organic geometry. We need to represent Olinka's organic geometry and how she can move so freely between those two things and really blend them together.
It's very human.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next slide. So this shows some more inspiration that we were looking at in the yellow area in particular, pulling in some of those nature references with these mushrooms, but in an abstracted way. And this is an early sketch and prototype for one of the walls in the yellow area, just showing one of the materials that we worked with, just a simple plastic sheet that becomes a very sculptural element once our artists have gotten their hands on it. And these are some more inspiration images, some kind of textures that we were looking at incorporating and how to bring in that sense of organic geometry.
We also feel very strongly that there should be places of rest within our work. There should be places where you can just sit or lay and contemplate and look and feel and just be in the piece. So it was very important to have some seating pieces, and these were the top is the inspiration, and then the models at the bottom are what we created.
And this is another sketch of an early kind of concept drawing for the chartreuse area in synesthesia, along with some inspiration images. Again, you can see pulling a lot from nature. And here we are back with those charming under the sea creatures that Karen introduced us to earlier. We would love, of course, to have seen this mural in person. We have not. However, there are great photos of it in the catalog. And of course, we all spent a lot of time looking at that catalog, and we're constantly drawn back to this fish face that you see in the upper left corner. It just has so much personality and is so charming. And we ultimately named this creature Baby Aqua. And Baby Aqua kind of became our mascot through the whole creation of synesthesia. But you can see a sketch here of the Baby Aqua space within synesthesia. You're kind of going into the mouth of this creature that then becomes this kind of abstracted underwater experience. I noticed in the chat earlier, someone said immersive makes them think of going underwater. And we feel that too. We've had a lot of underwater references throughout all of our work.
We do also do, and on Chartreuse, the one before, we actually have an underground piece to that also. So this idea of going into or being submerged in is something that we work with very often. But Baby Aqua, yes, is very popular within the team. We love Baby Aqua.
Yeah, and you might find those other little sea creatures in other places throughout the synesthesia experience. And then the next section is Lavender, which we imagined as kind of this abstracted blanket fort, like you would build as a child, gather up all your dining room chairs and your sheets and your blankets and build a magical fort, which we talk about forts sometimes as sort of like an early immersive experience that most of us have had. It's something that we can all refer to as a common shared experience. Most kids have built a blanket fort, and that is an immersive environment you're creating. So anyway, we took that inspiration, and Lavender felt like a blanket fort to us.
specifically a blanket fort on a rainy day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it has, we did also with synesthesia was the first time that we have tried to incorporate scent within our experience. We really try to engage all of the senses, but incorporating things like scent and taste, of course, can be a little tricky. But we have added some very subtle scent elements. We also don't want it to be overwhelming or trigger anybody's allergies or anything. So we try to make it sort of subtle and something you can opt into or out of if you choose. But there are some scent elements within the lavender space as well. Some early sketches and inspiration here. Okay, next slide.
This is some more concept drawings. We did these little pockets. The idea, once again, going back to memory, the kind of chimes, the little soft sculpture.
And then the next section we move into is fuchsia, which we think of sort of like a forest, but an abstracted idea of a forest. There are lots of these like cylindrical column shaped objects in there, and each of them has sort of its own experience within it. And we wanted each of the, we'll call them trees in the fuchsia forest, to kind of call back to some of the other spaces within synesthesia. So each one of the trees has some relation points either in the materials or the kind of imagery that's represented within them. They are repeated from some of the other areas, calling back to them.
It's just like a little echo space.
And then this is, we were really thinking a lot about the thresholds of the beginning and end of going into and out of synesthesia. One reason is just a practical concern of being within the environment of a traditional museum where outside of the synesthesia gallery, you are not invited to touch things. And so there's kind of two separate sets of rules that a museum goer will have to be aware of when they're in the space. And so we wanted to really give you the sense of you're entering or you're leaving a space, and these are very distinct places. And so this kind of flower-shaped design you see was an early rendering of an idea of sort of passing through a space that would distinguish between those two. You're in synesthesia or you're in the more traditional museum. And then on the right, you see some of our inspiration images, including those murals from Olinka, which we love, of course, that they go up and onto the ceiling. She's creating an immersive mural experience with those pieces. If you were to stand right underneath them, we really wish that we could. But yes, that idea of crossing over a threshold. So in the next slide, you'll see how this idea kind of evolved into what became the entryway into synesthesia and also the exit. So it became this sort of more square doorway. And then in the next slide, it evolved to incorporate more of those geometric qualities and the translucence and the layering that we love about Olinka's work.
Yeah, that's something we haven't talked about, is the translucent play of light. We really went heavy on that also. So a lot of sheer material, lots of things that you can see through, but you can also, it also kind of distorts what you're seeing and creates a different view. So this is the entry. And then I think somebody, when they talked about immersive, said site specific. We really wanted to create a larger exit piece, but the reality was the space wouldn't allow for that. So I think when we get to it, we ended up putting it on the wall, which actually worked really well and is kind of like our homage to Olinka at the end.
Next slide. Oh yeah, this was
that's
another early concept for what could have been on the exit end, and then it evolved into what it is now. Oh, and then also we talked about the windows earlier being kind of a new challenge for us. Because we'd like to create an immersive experience, which is fully 360 degrees around the participant. We like to address the floor and the ceiling and all sides of everything. And so we wanted those windows to really be part of the experience. It's not just an empty wall or a view into the outside. And so we wanted to alter those windows in a way. And so we created this design that would carry that color palette onto the exterior of the windows. So you can see it from the outside. It's really fun when it's lit up at night as well. But then when you're inside, it alters your view if you're looking out the window, but it also becomes part of this immersion within these color spaces to really fully surround you. In the next slide, I think you can see what it looks like from the outside. But yeah, I love it at nighttime or on a rainy day. It's really the best to see it from the outside.
It's so lit.
So good.
So the photo on the right is the actual entry space that we ended up creating. As you can see, it's very layered. That's all vinyl there. Something about our work is that we strive to be as close to 100% handmade as possible. We can't always get there, but we try very hard. So what you're seeing is we built the wooden structure, but then the team, because of the length of the vinyl and the mass of the structure, the team had to stitch the vinyl together. So that's really a whole made piece there that you're going to walk through on the entry. And that mimics the color scheme, of course, on the windows. It's a soft yellow. This is a seating area.
Yeah, and something I think that like this piece, everything that this piece is a good example of is that our team includes a very diverse range of artists and skill sets and kind of interests and expertise. And that is really necessary to this kind of work that we're making, is that it absolutely must be collaborative and it must involve a wide range of skills. And so every element within the experience you'll see has multiple, this piece alone has metal work, woodwork, upholstery, fiber art, all kinds of painting. It has all kinds of skills involved in making this one seating piece. And lots of artist hands were on it. And that is an inherent part of our process, how we make as a team. We're always collaborating and trying to bring together everyone's strengths to make something that absolutely would not be possible if we weren't working together. Okay, we could go to the next slide.
Chartreuse. This is the upper level on the left. There's a lower level. I don't think we have photos of that right now. But that's, like a really cozy nook and it's lit. All the stuff on the wall that you're seeing is all made by us. Any sort of rug or tufting areas that you see, we did make those ourselves. All the upholstery is done by us. All the furniture making is done by us. The metal work on the right is kind of so the piece on the left is up high, and then the piece on the right is how you'll come back down to ground level. There's Baby Aqua.
And here we are again at Baby Aqua.
We don't always want to do like literal representation of things. It's not super interesting to us to do that, but we fell so in love with Baby Aqua that we really felt the need to kind of translate that and give it as a starting point to this piece of the experience. And so once you pass through, you're in the kind of experience of what it would be in this little world that this creature would live in. There's Lavender. This on the right is a soft sculpture book that the artist created. And in this piece, as Kelsey said, there is a scent element. There's like a giant tea bag that we made that you can get some scent off of. It's just a really sweet, cozy, lovely space. All of the components are mostly it's sewn in fabric work in here. The prints on the fabric we did ourselves. We printed all the fabric, not on the floor, but on the pieces that are hanging.
And this is in the fuchsia area, the fuchsia forest. And the detail on the right is if you go into that doorway in the left and look up, there's a kaleidoscope above you. which pulls some inspiration from some of Olinka's work as well. And then, of course, you see the musical tree there on the left, which has direct reference to some of Olinka's works, and is very interactive. And people have been enjoying making music in the museum. And then this is that exit piece that we talked about, which is very much inspired by that main Riverside mural, and all of the layering and colors of Olinka's work, and creating that kind of end cap on the experience. And one of my favorite observations so far, there a couple of weeks ago, we had an event at the museum for the students to welcome them back to campus, and had a reception for them to come see Synesthesia. And I walked into this space, and there was a young woman standing underneath this archway, and she realized she was at the end of the experience, and she said, "Oh no, is this the end? I want there to be more." Which was one of my favorite things to overhear so far. But it clearly had indicated to her that she had come to the end, and that she was looking for more, which is what we love to hear.
Yeah. So we were given the opportunity to take over the museum store. It had been closed for a little bit. So we got in there and did some rearranging and added our branded merchandise, but we also include local made work, whether that is traditional art, wall hangings. We also have people who make jewelry, people who make cards and greeting cards and box sets, people who make soft sculpture work, pottery, fiber art, you name it. Like, we really wanted to get a good representation of Oklahoma art and artists into the space. So that it's a combination of our branded work, the Fred, some of the merchandise from that is Fred branded, and then local art and artists. And it's been great, and it's been a lovely opportunity to have that.
Yeah, and the store is open anytime the museum is open. So if you're looking for gifts or just to come see some art by local artists, it's a fun place to pop in.
It is
anytime.
fun. Yeah, it's very colorful.
Yeah. And of course, we have the catalog
Yes, we
about
do.
Olinka's work, which, if you're interested in learning more about her, this, as Karen mentioned, is a fantastic summary of who she is as an artist.
And we also carry the coffee.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in really quick, and I just want to thank you, Tammy and Kelsey and Factory Obscura, for activating our spaces again for us. Not only the gallery where you created Synesthesia, but also the store that, as you said, had been closed for some time. So it has been so great to see life in there again, and we have you all to thank for that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's been so good to partner together.
Absolutely. And so if anyone on the call here today is close enough to come by and see Synesthesia, while you're here in the museum, you can also find these works by Hrdy on display currently. So we're showing you those. And then also to remind everyone, as Tammy mentioned, so our partners at Yellow Dog Coffee Company have created this wonderful roast to sort of emulate the flavors that they were inspired by looking at Olinka Hrdy's work. And that is available in their store, but also in our shop as well. So please feel free to stop by. I'm going to go ahead and open things up now to the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Karen about Olinka Hrdy or anything for Tammy and Kelsey, please go ahead and feel free to share those in the chat. And while everyone's thinking about that, I have a question to kind of get things started. Tammy and Kelsey, I'm going to toss this to you first. And I'm sorry I didn't ask you this ahead of time.
That's okay.
I'm putting you on the spot. But I'm just curious, is while you were working on this project and spending a lot of time in the museum and learning about Olinka, is there anything that surprised you all kind of along the way? I'm sure there were many surprises, but is there anything that stands out to you the most that you were not
I think, we were drawn to Olinka's artwork first, just the skill and the beauty of them. But then the more we learned about her as a person, I think I was surprised by how kind of subversive she was, which we of course related to in a lot of ways, and kind of loved about her. I mean, like that story Karen told earlier about painting that mural in her dorm room. I just love that story. I think it's hilarious, and would love to hear her tell that story.
Yeah, agreed. I was surprised that she, and this is something that we would have done also, is that she left all her work to you all to use in whatever way you wanted to. And I think that kind of like communal giving, that sort of like take this and run with it.
Yeah,
idea
kind of pay it forward in a way.
was interesting and surprising, but once again, very in line with what we would do. I mean, we just think we would get along really well with her, and we were really bummed that we couldn't collaborate more in a more realistic way with her.
But it does feel like we've been collaborating with her.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I would love for her to be able to see somehow, you know, what you all have created.
Yes.
That would be so interesting. What
Really.
thoughts would that would be? Karen, I'm going to make you turn your camera back on. I have a question for you now. Sorry.
Hello again.
Okay, so you mentioned very briefly, and I know we've kind of talked about it internally, but in some of your reading to prepare for this presentation, what have you found, or where are we at as far as her murals that were installed in Riverside Studio? What kind of, I mean, if you know anything, like what kind of happened to them?
So the murals, the Riverside Studio was completed, I think, in 1929, and Patty Adams Schreiner, who it was built for, actually only used it until the early 30s. I think it was 1933. And then it sat vacant for a while. Apparently, at some point, Holland Hall, a private school in Tulsa, used it when their facility was under renovation. Then it became a private home again for a little while, but since the 50s, it's actually been this Spotlight Theater home. So the murals have been missing probably since that time after Patty Schreiner moved out. And they weren't painted directly on the wall, they were panels that were then attached. So, you know, the hope was that maybe they're rolled up in someone's attic, or they would, you know, show back up at some point. As far as I know, that hasn't been the case. No one knows what happened to them. So it's a mystery, you know, holding out hope that maybe they're still out there somewhere. But unfortunately, the only thing we have of the actual murals is those photographs that we showed you. But on the upside, we do have the studies that are here at the museum. And if you're able to see them in person, they're not, only one of them is on display right now, but they're very small. So to imagine what they would have been like in those dimensions, you know, 16 feet tall, going up onto the ceiling, it's kind of amazing to think what they would look like if we could actually visit the studio as it was when she was there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when, you know, I think about that, then when I go into synesthesia, I kind of, for me personally, I think about this as being the same, it creates the same feeling for me that I imagine I might have if I were to be able to see those in real life, in that size, you know, as Tammy and Kelsey mentioned, going onto the ceiling in kind of that immersive way. But it's almost like we still get to experience the same feeling without actually having those works, thanks to Factory Obscura, which I think is really quite amazing.
Yeah,
absolutely. I don't see any questions or comments.
Someone had fun in the mushroom room.
Yeah,
I
found it.
Yeah.
I will mention we didn't put a photo of the mushroom room in. We didn't put a lot of photos in. We want you to come. We want you to come see it in person and discover those things.
The discovery is part of the fun.
So someone is asking, how long will the installation be available? So it is up until June 4th of 2023. So you have quite a bit of time to get here and see it. And then how many people worked on the project? Tammy, Kelsey, how many on the team altogether?
There were around 20 of us who worked on this, and that also included some students from OU. We had 6 students who were recommended by the faculty and selected by our team to kind of apprentice with us through the whole process of design and fabrication and installation, so that they could have an experience of what it's like to create and build something like this. And most of them were art students. We had one engineering student and one art historian, but they were all makers of all different kinds. And so they contributed to this. You'll see there are some pieces in there that they helped us make specifically. So that was nice to have the students involved. But yeah, around 20 people. And there is a list of artist names at the beginning of the exhibition if you go see it.
Yeah.
On our website.
I love that you all have such a diverse group of people that is on every team when you work on a project. With so many different backgrounds, and there's so many perspectives, you know, it's not like a singular kind of thing that happens. And I think that really adds to the whole success of what you all do. So that's kind of one of my favorite parts of you
it
all.
really, as I said earlier, is necessary for this kind of work. And I think about the very first thing that Factory Obscura built together, our first project called Shift. You know, we had assembled an artist team and we didn't really know what we were going to be making yet. We just had this idea of creating, you know, immersive art experiences. And there was a poet on that team. And at one point, this poet came to me and said, does this project have poetry in it? Like, does this need poems? And I said, well, there's a poet on the team, so that means there's poetry in this project, right? So it's like we're making our soup and everybody's bringing their ingredients, and the soup is a result of what the ingredients are that we bring.
There's no right way to do it.
Yeah,
like it is what it is.
Yeah, it really is a result of the skills and the ideas that the artists bring to the table.
I saw somebody mention the community make days. So since the beginning, we've invited the community on certain parts and aspects of the work to come help make with us. Usually it's small components that get put into a larger piece, so they don't always know exactly what they're making, but that's always a fun thing to do. And it's part of our goal and mission is community building and community bonds and ways to network and connect people together. And part of that is the community make days.
Yeah, we find one of the really rewarding impacts and kind of ripple effects of this work is having shared experiences, having positive shared experiences with other people, whether it's people that you already knew or people that you meet because of that shared experience. That connection with other people out in the world has ripple effects that we think are really positive.
Absolutely. Definitely agree. I don't see, if anybody doesn't have anything else, I think we're close to time. I'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
We're at our permanent experience mixtape. It's here in Oklahoma City, and we are currently doing upgrades. We're adding a bunch of stuff. So we will be reopening on the 28th of September. So come and visit us here too.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see all the new stuff.
It's gonna be fun. It's good. Yeah,
There's some good
it's
stuff.
good.
Well, okay, so thank you so much, Karen, for taking the time to share with us about Olinka Hrdy, and Tammy and Kelsey, always for being so generous with your time and creative process. Synesthesia, as we mentioned, is currently on view until June 4th of 2023. If you're in the area, please stop by, and also be sure, as Tammy mentioned, to check out their permanent location mixtape in Oklahoma City. Thank you also to Yellow Dog Coffee Company for creating such a delicious roast for this program. We truly enjoy working with you all and appreciate your support of our program. And of course, thank you to our audience members for joining us this morning. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to mark your calendars for the next Coffee with the Collection that will take place on Friday, November 11th at 9:30 a.m. We'll take a trip back to 1970 through the newspaper-inspired screen prints currently on view in the special exhibition Robert Rauschenberg, Pressing News. OU Daily Newsroom Advisor and Student Media Assistant Director Seth Prince will join the conversation to share insights about the exhibition and the surprisingly timely connections to our present day. A link to register for that event should be in the chat now, but I'll also send it out with the recording from today's program. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us, and have a wonderfully creative weekend.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.